As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Good morning and welcome to a Moss Adams webcast. I'm Katie Soderberg, the webcast producer for today's presentation on the 4 attributes of high-performing organizations. I'm very pleased to introduce you to Mark Steranka, our presenter for today's webcast. Mark offers over 25 years of experience working with businesses, not-for-profits, and governments across the United States to improve organizational performance through alignment of plans, performance, people, and communication. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Mark to get the webcast started. Mark, the presentation is now in your hands.
Thanks, Katie, and good morning or good afternoon to the folks on the phone. We're really excited to talk to you about this topic, which we really feel is getting a lot of traction in the marketplace, mainly because it just makes sense. We've got business leaders from across the U.S. and Canada on the phone, so really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to join us. So I'm going to do my best on behalf of Moss Adams to stimulate some of your thinking on what you can do to truly be a high-performing organization. And that doesn't mean you haven't been successful to date. I'm sure everyone on the phone has been successful, but it's really about what's your real potential and how successful can you be, and can you truly get to that next level. So some concepts, some stimulating thought, hopefully to do that. We're going to talk about some important trends in the marketplace. We're going to talk about what we think are some best practices, and again, really just to get you thinking about what are the things that you can do to really drive your organization to its fullest potential. So we're going to start with a little stage setting, and in doing so, it's to get you to think about your organization from an external perspective, so kind of what does the market think of you. We're going to talk a little bit about an internal perspective, what do your employees think of you, and then a couple of the key challenges in the marketplace that have an impact on performance, and ultimately one of the themes we'll talk about is engagement. How do we maximize employee engagement, because that is one of the keys to all of our organization's successes. So the first sort of context is, as I mentioned, the external market. So if you think about your customer base and put yourself in their shoes, what would they think is the DNA or the culture of your organization? What do you represent, and how do you show up in the marketplace? How do you truly resonate with your customers? How do you get in a position of when they think of X, they think of you? And similarly, how do you differentiate from your competitors when they think of X? Why do they not think of someone else? Why do they think of you? And what things you can do to accentuate the position that you want to be in. And so one of the things that concepts we wanted to cover with you is kind of as an intro, and I don't know, some of you I'm sure have seen there's a TED Talk on what's called the Golden Circle. And it's a really simple concept that I'm going to briefly introduce because I think it's quite powerful. So the concept's really about how do you present yourself to the marketplace? And you sort of have 3 choices. Do you focus on what you do? We provide these services, we provide these products, and we all should be able to do that effectively, but is that going to get you in the most traction in the marketplace? Or do you focus on how you do what you do, what differentiates you in the products or the services that you provide? Or do you focus on why you exist, why you're in business? And so with that, we're going to sort of shift focus to the internal, because that's really what we're going to get into during this web session. So what would your employees, on the flip side, say is your organization's DNA or your culture? What do they think? What do you do, and how do you engage your employees to the maximum extent possible? How do you attract and retain the best people in the marketplace? How do you position your employees to be operating at their highest and best use? I think we would all agree that these are all items that are critical to success. And so before we talk about sort of how you approach that in a construct that we've in essence kind of developed, but again, it's just common sense, I want to talk about two very key market or business challenges that impact your ability, our ability to do the things that we just covered. So the first is really an alarming trend in employee engagement. And I think we can all also agree that employee engagement is critical to our organizations being all that they can be, to firing on all cylinders. So there was a Gallup poll. Seems a little dated now, but it hasn't been updated yet, but it's still extremely relevant. In 2013, it was a survey of just over 150,000 workers in the U.S. of age 18 or older, and it was focused on employee engagement. And here were really, I thought, the astounding results of this survey. So the survey found that 70% of those 151,000 employees are not fully engaged. And that broke down as follows. 52% being not engaged, and that means they're not fully engaged. They're going through the motions. They're sort of doing the minimum. They're not, true contributors. They're not drivers in our business. They're just going through the motion. And the 18% actively disengaged. These are the folks that you want and need to leave, but they're actively working against what you're trying to accomplish. And then the study tried to estimate, a productivity impact associated or loss of that. And, it's a big number. And, if it was half that number, it's still a big number. But just think of your organizations, and I know we can certainly do this for ours, if our employees were that disengaged from our business, what would that be doing to us? And can we possibly afford for that to be the case? And even if we are successful today, how much more successful could we possibly be if we had higher employee engagement? So that's one challenge, employee engagement. The next challenge is just the sheer market demographics that we all know about, but I just want to highlight it, a couple of them. So here we have the different generations from traditionalists down to Generation Y, what their sort of their range of age is based on the generational definitions, although you can see that they vary depending on sources in 2015, what the median age would be in 2020, and how many people are in each of those. And the exact numbers aren't critical. It's the impact. So the first is, what's the impact between the baby boomers, who are really the drivers of industry today, generationally, doesn't mean that they're only ones, and the generation that's following them, Generation X. And the obvious thing that stands out is the difference in the number of individuals in each of those generations. We're going to have a supply and demand challenge. We've got 74 million baby boomers exiting the marketplace every day, and we've got 66 million who are the next generation to fill their roles. And so we have a challenge there. Secondly, if we skip a generation, what Generation Y, which are often referred to just by virtue of age as sort of the baby boomers' kids, you see this significant age gap. And especially if you think about family-owned, privately owned businesses, that if you're thinking about what's the next generation and are they ready to take on the roles of their parents, et cetera, and the sort of the obvious answer is, for the most part, that's not going to be the case, or at least not yet. And so what is that going to do to all of our businesses? What are the impacts? So we're going to have a supply and demand. It's going to be harder to find qualified people. It's going to be much harder to find qualified people that are the right fit. It's going to cost more to find them. It's going to cost more to hire them. It's going to cost more to retain them. Their expectations are going to be higher because, all things point to we are increasingly moving towards one of those phases, one of those cycles of it's an employee's market. And that has all of the obvious ripple effects on our businesses that create a tremendous challenge for us. So employee engagement is a challenge, employee attraction and retention and compensation, the cost of them is going to be a challenge. So what do we do about it? And Simon talked about sort of the golden circle. How do we present ourselves in the marketplace? What we're talking about, we're sort of coining the golden formula, but it's just a very, very simple concept that we try to work with all of our clients, businesses of every shape and size, not-for-profits, governments, it applies to all, is to try to focus on these four things, and I'll explain them very simply. So the first one is a plan. We all should have some form of a plan. Yeah, it'd be great if it was a comprehensive strategic plan, but something more than what's in our heads, certainly something more than what's on a napkin, but something that will tell our organizations, and when I mean our organizations, everyone in our organizations, what we're trying to accomplish. We're at point A, we're trying to get to point B. What does point B look like, and what are the things that we do to get there? So first, the plan. Second is how we need to perform to achieve that plan. How do we define what we need to do, and what do we need to measure to demonstrate that we're making the progress that we are seeking, that we're making the progress from point A, current state, to point B, future state, in the manner that we expected? What are the things that we are doing, and are we accomplishing them? And then what's the impact of those activities on the end game, or our goals, or our outcomes? Third, how do we align our people with the performance in the plan? So on one hand, how do we cultivate the people to have the skill sets to keep them, to retain them, and give them the tools and skills that they need and the competencies they need to be able to perform in the way that we need them to perform to be able to accomplish the plan that we've defined. And then secondly, as part of the people, how do we compensate them in a way that incentivizes the performance that will achieve the plan? So we need those three things in alignment. A plan with how we track, measure, communicate performance, how we cultivate and compensate our employees. And then the fourth element is, and really don't bother doing any of those three things if you're not going to get the leverage of communicating that to your employee base, not to your executive team, not to your senior managers, but to your full employee base, so that they can not only understand how they contribute to that per person, so that they feel like they're making a contribution to what you're trying to accomplish. And then we'll talk about, and just as importantly, how can you engage them in the process of doing these three things. So have alignment between plan, performance, and people, and communicate to your employee base how that alignment needs to exist, and how those three things work together, and getting the leverage and the credit of doing those. So very simple concept. So all we're going to do now is just peel the onion a little bit and go into each of these four areas a little deeper. So the first is plans. So we all know what a strategic plan is. Nothing new here, but if you haven't gone through a strategic planning process anytime recently, what are things that you can do that are best practices that are going to have the biggest impact on your organization of going through a planning process or creating a plan? So the first part is we're going to talk a little bit about what would make it a comprehensive plan, not just a mission and vision and some goals, but what will give you something that you can specifically execute to, and that your employees can understand and get behind. The second part of it is engaging your employees in the process. It really shouldn't be something that just lives at the executive team level. There are easy ways to get your employees engaged in the process, which will give you the benefit of their insights, and then it'll also gain their buy-in in the execution. And then finally, an area that is typically lost in the process is how do you use a strategic plan as a day-to-day management tool and not just some document, if you have gone to the effort of doing it, that sits on a shelf that you dust off every quarter to see how you're doing. So those are three concepts we're going to talk about. So first, in terms of the plan, really four components of it. So the first are the inputs to the plan. And so the plan shouldn't just start with what's our vision for the next 25 years or whatever period. It should be in part looking at, so yes, what's your long-term vision, but how did you get to where you got today? Often going through that process, it's never not been the case, the double negative, where a client hasn't looked back on their past 3 years and really looked at their revenue and their costs and find out what services or products really are driving their profitability. What customers are really driving their success. And so gaining the understanding of truly how did you get to where you are today so you can make informed decisions about how to move forward tomorrow. Another part is really understanding what your target customer base is and how their characteristics differ across the customer base, and what do you do to align with each of those different types of customers. Fourth piece is looking at the competition, is learning from your competition, seeing how they're going to market, what they're offering, what best practices can you gain from them, what are they doing for particular customers that really are creating a competitive advantage for them. Don't just focus on yourself, but focus on what you can learn from them, but then at the same time, and then therefore, how do you distinguish yourselves from them? And then finally is, and this is really where you can get your employee base engaged, is a SWOT analysis. Survey your employees on what they think your strengths are, your weaknesses, your opportunities and threats. Learn from them. Guaranteed you'd learn from them in the process, and in doing so, you've thereby engaged them, and you're going to get their greater buy-in in the execution of the plan. The next piece is, so then where are you going? Whatever period of time, in this case it's 5 years, what are your 5-year business goals? What are your market strategies to achieve those goals? What are the priority things that you need to do? So that's kind of the high level, big picture, now defining how you move forward. That's where most organizations stop, is they get to that point. But there's no reason that a strategic plan shouldn't be also part action plan. What do you specifically need to do to execute each of those priority initiatives? Just the classic who, what, when, and what's it going to cost. And your strategic planning process should define those things, because now with that information, now you do have a management tool. Now you have something to manage against. And then you would really be incomplete if you didn't then identify the key metrics that are going to tell you whether the strategies that you're executing on are having the impact that they should have. And so if you put those pieces together, you will have what we would call a comprehensive strategic plan, but you'll have something that you can actually execute against. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can use that as a management tool. And if you've gained the input of your employee base, again, in the process, and if you're communicating the output of this plan to your full employee base, then you're getting the greatest impact of that plan, and you're going to get the greatest engagement. So with that, first of 4 polling questions. And so these are worded carefully, so please read them carefully. And what I ask you to do is pick the one that, select the one that makes sense, hit the submit button at the end to get your response recorded. But let me read the questions to you, the options real quickly. So does your organization have a formal strategic plan? But we differentiate between a plan developed with employee involvement and awareness and communicated to your employee base when it was completed, versus second option, developed with employee involvement but really the plan just resides at your executive level, your leadership level. Third, developed and resides at the leadership level, so didn't get employee involvement in the process and didn't really communicate it out. Or fourth, don't have a formal strategic plan. So we'll give you a few moments to select the one that fits, hit the submit button, and again, we need you to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions for you to get CP credit to the extent that that matters to you. All right, we'll give it one more minute here, a few more seconds actually. Okay, let's see what we got. So the responses are the first option, employee involvement, employee awareness of the plan, just under 18%. Employee involvement but resides at the leadership level, 17%. Developed at the leadership level and remains at the leadership level, 40%, which is common. I mean, I would say that kind of fits in with the marketplace. And then just under 25%, no formal plan. So actually, of the group here, much better than normal. If I were speaking at a conference, for example, and asked people to raise their hands of who has a strategic plan, it would be a lot lower percentage typically than this group, so that's great. But really the opportunity is to have a plan or have a plan that really gets employee engagement. So the second piece of what we're calling this the golden formula. So first P was plan, second P is perform. So the strategic plan should identify a key set of metrics that are going to give you a pulse in the organization of are you accomplishing your plan, and specifically, is the plan having the impact that you've set out for it to have. But then when you talk about performance of an organization as a whole, really there are 3 levels. There's that enterprise level where a strategic plan should reside. There, of course, is a department level, which is where most organizations are the strongest in terms of measuring performance, and in some cases almost over-measuring performance in terms of how many different metrics they track. And then there's the individual level, what we're each contributing to the organization, and that's often either a management by objective, so certain things we're asking our employees to accomplish each year or each time period, or just core values that we have as an organization as a whole that we expect them to be able to demonstrate and measure in that way. The key here is, and we're kind of setting the stage for compensation, is to be able to measure performance at multiple levels, not to create this complicated construct to do, but just acknowledge that there is performance at multiple levels, in that depending on where you reside in the organization hierarchically is where you can have the greatest impact on performance. And use an extreme, an intern is going to have very little impact on the performance of the organization as a whole versus what he or she could do individually. Someone at a department level, a department director, vice president, et cetera, is going to have some more ability to affect the organization as a whole, but not as much as the C-suite. And so acknowledging where we can have the impact that we do. So what could that look like? And so one of the things when we go through a strategic planning process, and this is by far usually the most painful part of the process, is to get organizations to identify really a handful of metrics that represent what they're trying to accomplish in a strategic plan. And so here all we're demonstrating is three levels. At an enterprise level, a financial requirement that net profit, EBITDA, for example, that's going to represent and drive what we're trying to accomplish financially. And again, we'll loop back to that when we talk about compensation. some strategic measure of what we're trying to accomplish, whether it's grow our customer base, grow geographically, improve customer satisfaction. It can be anything, but it should be something that truly represents strategically what we're trying to accomplish in this time frame of the planning time frame. And of course, that can change over time. And then having each of our functions or departments identify a performance metric, at the most two, but we really try to get it to one, that will really represent what each department has to accomplish to be achieving the strategic plan, to achieving the strategic initiative and the financial requirement. And it's extremely painful to try to pick one, but going through that process really requires you to focus and really be introspective of what is it, what we do, whether it's legal or IT or operations or marketing. What are the seminal things that we're doing and what we can measure that's going to tell us whether we're doing what we need to do to support the strategic plan and be aligned with it. And then outside of the strategic planning process, but in overall performance down at the individual level, what that looks like, how do we want to measure performance, and then also at the department level, yes, there are going to be a whole lot of other metrics that as department leaders we're going to want to track, but that goes beyond what we're looking at from a strategic standpoint. So then if we go to the third piece, so we've covered one, we've got a plan. Two, we've defined how we can measure performance in a way that tells us whether we're accomplishing our plan. Three, people. So it's going to be two concepts. How do we cultivate the people that we need to be successful? How do we compensate people in a way that we need to be successful? So cultivating. None of our organizations are steady state or static. We're all trying to grow, expand, evolve in some way, and we should be forecasting literally what our employee base needs to look like to achieve whatever our goals are. And what do those people look like at each level in the organization, each function of the organization, each geography of the organization. And I'm sure you're all finding today how much more difficult it is, certainly than during the recession, but even than it was 2 or 3 years ago, how much more difficult it is to find the people that we need to fuel our organizations. We're all feeling that. And it's going to get that much more difficult. So we have to be very strategic and very precise about what we need and get those balls in motion to always be building a pool and a bench of candidates for that. But we really got to define what that looks like. And it doesn't mean we need 100 people. It means we need 10 people who look like this, 5 people who look like that, 7 people who are in this location. And we really need to know what that looks like. So that's sort of the human capital needs part. The career path, it's going to be harder and harder to retain the people that we want to retain because of the demographics in the marketplace, the becoming increasingly an employee's market. So how do we, and if you think about, our youngest employees and how much more different they are in terms of their mindset and approach to working than we are. I happen to be the very last year of the baby boomers. There are those generational differences, and we're going to have to work a lot harder to keep those employees longer. And so we need to really be able to truly map out what does a career path look like here, and how do we help you move along that continuum in a way that meets your needs of the things you want to do, in a way that meets our needs in terms of a business. And what competencies are going to be required along that career path continuum, and how do we help you acquire, retain, develop those competencies? And because that's a partnership. But we have to be able to know what it is, quantify it, and then we have to be able to map it out, and then we have to be able to deliver it. So a couple of visuals of that just to sort of make the point. So here is just meant to, there's all different facets of an organization, and really all I want you to take away is just think of 2 buckets, managerial and technical. And there's in helping employees to understand what it looks like on a career path in your organization. And are we what we sometimes refer to an up or out organization? Do we always need to be moving up in the organization, which is highly typical in a professional services organization, to be someone who's worth keeping? Or can we have all different types of contributors in terms of, I don't always have to be moving up? And the classic there is thinking technical versus managerial. And are we addressing the career paths of a technical pathway versus a managerial? The managerial part's easy, in a way that's what's represented here. But how do we meet the needs of the organization in both contexts and the desires of our employees, depending on which bucket they fit into? And how are we developing those competencies, and how are we keeping them along the way? And the second graphic here is just to think of competencies. And this is going to differ for every organization, but what is your DNA? What's your culture? What's important to you? And so here, we've just picked some, but what the key is really defining at each level of the organization and in each function of organization, what do those competencies look like? And what are we doing as an organization to develop them within our people? So we're positioning them to be successful. We're positioning them to make the highest and best use of them, or to make their highest and best contribution to the organization. And that has to be an ongoing dialogue and ongoing intentional effort to be creating those skill sets, and not just the classic, hey, congratulations, you were a senior technical person today, tomorrow you're a manager, and go off and do good things. So those things are key obviously to employee engagement, career path, cultivating, developing the competencies. So second polling question for you, simple one: does your organization do, and let's just say a regular employee engagement or employee satisfaction survey? Not that you've done it once at some point, but is it something that you do on a regular basis where you're polling, you're testing your employees' engagement or satisfaction through a survey process? So again, select the option that represents your organization. Please hit the submit button to enter your results. I'll give it about 5 more seconds here, because obviously that shouldn't take long to pick a yes or no. So 41% yes, 59% no. And again, I would say actually that's pretty good. Similarly, if I were at a conference speaking on this topic and asked the audience to raise their hands, and granted, not everyone's going to raise their hand in every case, but usually it's less than 10%, and that are doing some type of ongoing employee engagement surveying. So while 59, almost 60% is a big number, this is much better than the marketplace. Okay, the other part of the third piece of the formula is compensating. And just to get you a few concepts here, thinking strategically about compensation. So just acknowledging salary is a fixed cost, and in general, we want to minimize fixed costs. And I know that's easier said than done in an increasingly competitive marketplace, but that's a concept. How do we strategically leverage variable costs, incentive compensation, or bonuses in a way that creates a win-win between the organization and the employee, because that's the best of all worlds? And how do we do that in a way that ties variable costs or bonus to performance? And I can tell you the overriding norm in the marketplace is we, as businesses, do a discretionary bonus at the end of the year. We look how the company did. We give everyone X%, 5%, 10% across the board. It's a wonderful thing to get a bonus, but it's discretionary. It's not saying you're getting this because you did X, you're just getting this because the company did Y. And so you're not getting a strategic leverage of that, as strategic a leverage as you could of that bonus. So just to dive a little deeper on compensation, and I will have to just make one sort of editorial comment here. I've been at conferences and put up this slide, and people have literally taken pictures with their phones of this slide, which seemed awfully flattering, but it seemed kind of weird. So just a concept, a construct, or a framework of how to think about compensation. So a few things going on here. Hopefully it doesn't look too complicated, but it's a lot less complicated than even you might think. So think of compensation at just three basic levels: executive, management, and staff. Think of compensation across three levels, which we've already touched on: company or enterprise level, department level, individual level. And then finally, just think about budgeting for incentive compensation at the beginning of the year versus just figuring out what you might give out at the end of the year. So the first is that, in a way, a step beyond the norm, which would be everyone gets 5%, is think about, and that might be the right answer. There's no right and wrong answer. It's what fits for each particular organization. But you might decide there are varying levels of distribution depending on your level in the organization. Some companies would say, no, we're all equals, and that's right. And some would say, no, executives have a higher impact. Some would say, you know what, staff are more important and they should have the bigger. So it's whatever fits, but at least contemplate that. More importantly, think about how you might measure performance and therefore pay incentive compensation based on the concept of where you're contributing to the organization. So again, what this is just demonstrating is that you're having the largest piece of your compensation aligned with where you have the most impact. Executives at an enterprise level, management at a department level, staff at an individual level. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. We work with organizations where this goes 100, 0, 0, at executive, 0, 100, 0 at department, 0, 0, 100 at staff. We have some where it's 33 across the board. It's 75, 25, 0. It's whatever you want your compensation philosophy to be. But the key here is trying to get your employees to think as owners, that they're just not this one individual doing their thing, back to the engagement survey, just showing up and going through the motions. You want them thinking about, yeah, I'm doing my individual thing, but I'm contributing to what's happening at a department level. I'm contributing to what's happening at a company level. I understand what our strategic plan is. As incremental my contribution is, I have some sense of how I fit into the bigger picture, and I think like an employee, a department head, an owner, and I can wear all three of those hats. Because, again, what we're just trying to do is maximum engagement, people caring as much as they can about what they do to give us the best out of each employee and use them as at their highest and best use. And then finally, I can't tell you how many organizations don't budget for incentive compensation. They just wait and see what happens at the end of the year. Budget for it, and then therefore you can have layers of performance, higher and lower. If you exceed your budget, what does that do? The key, though, is budgeting it so that not only it's built into your operating plan, but now you can communicate to your employee base what that bogey is. What are they eligible for if they achieve the performance they need to achieve? And I'm actually now pushing forward to the fourth and final topic, which is compensation, communication. Before we do that, a polling question for you on incentive compensation. This is like that first question of strategic planning. You have to read each option carefully. So the first one, performance based on company, department, and individual performance. So taking into consideration all three. Performance bonus based on company and department. performance based on just company performance, but all three of those are performance-based. The fourth one, or just a discretionary bonus based on company performance. And then fourth, no bonus. So think about that one a little bit. Select the option that fits your organization, and then again, please hit submit. Getting your responses will make you eligible for the CPE. So I'll give that a few more seconds since it was a little bit more than a yes or no question. Okay. So what do we've got? We've got pretty encouraging results. So almost 37%, the first option, performance bonus based on company, department, and individual performance. So this audience is not typical of the marketplace, which is a very complimentary comment to all of you. 4%, the second option, performance on company and department. 10% on performance based on just company performance. Fourth, 28% based on a discretionary bonus based on company, and 21% no bonus at all. So pretty across the board. The surprising and encouraging response there is how many were the first option, which again is very atypical, so way to go. So finally, the last piece of what we're calling the golden formula, so communication. And this is the piece that by far tends to be the most lacking and have the most opportunity. And when I show you a few examples after this slide, you'll sort of see it, and I'm sure you would relate to it in your organizations. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, alignment of planning, performing, and your people is key. The key is to have alignment between those. But you really need to be communicating to your employee base how that alignment works and what you're doing to achieve that alignment to have the impact that you want to have. It's not enough for that to reside in your executive team and your executive team to be working towards that, because they cannot accomplish that on their own if your employees aren't part of that process. So you need to have some form of meeting rhythm that you are communicating to your full employee base the things that you need them to be aware of, to buy into, to be engaged into, to contribute to. And in a way, it's really not more complicated than that in what you cover at what frequencies. It's mostly intuitive, but again, can tailor to the organizations. But do you have a strategic plan? Do you annually communicate to your employee base what your plan is, what you're trying to accomplish? Do you, for example, quarterly have an all-hands meeting? It could be by video conference. It can be in person, depending on how big or small your organization is, how geographically dispersed it is, and where you are in the progress against the plan. And communicating that so that they understand where you are, you're being transparent, you're avoiding surprises at the end of the year. If you're really doing using this construct where you have a plan and performance and compensation tied together, that you're able to communicate to your employee base, here's what we're halfway through the year, we're at 80% of what we need to be. Here's what that translates into what you're eligible for incentive-based, performance-based compensation. That's where the power gets in being able to align and communicate that, and then be able to make decisions about it. It doesn't do you any good to find out at the end of the year that you are at 90% of your goal. You need to know along the way where you are so that you can make corrections along the way. So here's another way to think of it, and this is just the same sort of the performance metrics, but just think of it as a dashboard. And how do we communicate to our employee base on a regular basis, whatever frequency, where we are in terms of what our targets are, where our actuals are. Think of the green, yellow, red, simple way to show progress. And then you can even take it a step further, which we'll do in one of our examples of literally tying the compensation to it, and how much in the money is the organization based on the performance. I mean, that is truly powerful. And the key really is and part of that is your employee base has to understand that there has to be some minimum company performance for there to be any payout, any performance-based, incentive-based payout. There has to be a threshold, and below that threshold, there's not the money to do it. You can, of course, decide at the end of the year to do it anyway, but employees need to understand that there is a minimum that has to be achieved, and communicate that and be able to make progress against it and make changes as necessary towards it. So, last polling question before I briefly cover a couple examples. So how does your leadership communicate with your employee base? In this case, you're choosing all that are applicable. So not just one, any that are applicable, and then hit the submit button. So all employee in-person meetings, pre-recorded voicemails that go out like our school districts do, for example, webinars like this, a video conference, a newsletter, perhaps it's a letter from the CEO or president, broadcast emails could be the same. Any that apply. I'll give you a few more seconds. And let's see what kind of results we got. All employee in-person meetings, 78%. That's awesome. That's a great response. Pre-recorded voicemail, 2.5%. Webinar live meeting, 25%. I'm still waiting for video conferencing to catch on. I thought it was going to catch on 10 years ago, so I don't know what the problem is. Newsletters, 80%. Email, 0. Maybe just ran out of time, but that's good. Especially the in-person meetings. There's nothing more powerful than that. And for me, that could be by video conference also, of course, if you have multiple locations. So, real quickly, just a couple of examples, and this is kind of just to, in a way, reiterate the power of this little golden formula of just thinking of planning, performing, people, and communicating. So this first example, phenomenal large physician group, very successful, never done a strategic plan. However, they've been extremely successful, so obviously having a strategic plan wasn't critical to their success. In fact, last night we just, with their CEO, presented their strategic plan to their all-physician group, between 200 and 300 physicians. And the couple of points I just want to make were, one, what was in the plan, and two, what we witnessed at the meeting, which were really best practices. So as far as the plan, one of the primary catalysts for the plan was this physician group is sitting on a very large cash position. So they're trying to decide, what do they do with it? Do they invest it in things related to the business? Do they pay it out in dividends to the physicians? Do they invest it in their people in terms of leadership development, quality of life, being able to take sabbaticals, all sorts of things. But the key point is one of the drivers was they've got this pot of money and they're trying to decide what to do with it. And lo and behold, we go through a strategic planning process, engage the executives, the management, do an all-physician survey, and get their input. And here's what comes out of it. And literally, these aren't in priority order, but they're really kind of identified in sequential order of what they defined as things that were important for them to address. So these were their 6 strategic goals and initiatives. Recruit and retain top physician talent, which, by the way, had a very large diversity component to it to do a better job of aligning with the marketplace. Increase physician engagement. They just did their first physician sort of satisfaction survey, and not that they needed it to tell them, but they got a lot of work to do on physician engagement. develop effective physician leaders, achieve balanced physician compensation. Notice we haven't gotten to the investments yet, and that was the point that I wanted to make, is these things that we talked about in this formula are the things that came out of the organization, both at executive level, a senior leadership level, a physician level, of what was most important for them to be focused on. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I'm actually going to stop after this one to see if we have any questions before we run out of time. This is what we observed at this physician meeting, which was both in person and by video conference. The leadership of the organization rolled out their strategic plan, number one. They provided very insightful financial and operational performance metrics at an enterprise level, so very transparent. They presented year-to-date performance on the components. I think there were 12 or 13 components of the pay formula for the physicians, of which, so there's a whole variety of criteria that go into what they get paid, where they are year-to-date. For each criteria, are they at 100% of achievement, 50% of achievement, 0%? Actually listed the physicians who are at 100% in each of the 12 categories, and then identified the payout that they're eligible for the end of the year based on their current performance. I mean, that was amazing. I've never seen an organization basically tie that triangle together that we talked about in this formula right there. And what the strategic plan for them is doing now is giving them guidance, okay, what do they need to be focused on strategically moving forward, and how do they wrap these amazing things that they're actually already doing in engaging their employee base. So we were incredibly impressed with what they're doing. So we're actually just about out of time. Katie, do we have time for one question?
Sure, Mark. We could take a few quick questions, or probably just one. We had so many come in throughout the presentation, so thanks to all of our attendees for your engagement and your interest in this topic. Mark, we actually had an interesting question from a not-for-profit when you were discussing incentives, compensation, and performance bonuses. One of our attendees asked, stated that they worked for a not-for-profit and found performance bonuses to be problematic. So he's wondering if you could give, some justifications or reasoning that they could present to their board to kind of reopen that conversation of performance bonuses for their staff.
Absolutely, and performance, that's one of those misunderstood concepts. Number one, not-for-profit doesn't mean that you're not trying to achieve certain performance, and you absolutely can have performance-based compensation. Lots do, at the same time, lots don't because of the exact sort of perspective that you described, because they kind of feel like they shouldn't be. We're a not-for-profit. We shouldn't be rewarding performance. But every not-for-profit has a mission, and in some cases you might argue more mission-driven than a regular business, depending on what their focus is. But they are a business, and they are trying to achieve the things that they're trying to achieve. And why isn't it as appropriate to reward the performance that's achieving their objectives, especially if they're mission-driven, in terms of trying to cure something, trying to serve some disadvantaged, population group. So absolutely, performance-based compensation is appropriate in a not-for-profit environment. You always want to be respectful of the context and environment, but there's no reason that they should be in that way any different than any business. So it's all about incentivizing the performance you're trying to achieve. And in a way, use compensation strategically. Don't build up your salaries. Build up your performance-based compensation. So reduce your fixed costs. It doesn't mean you have to go actually reduce salaries, but don't increase them as much moving forward. So don't increase your fixed costs, but increase your variable costs. That's a win-win whether you're a not-for-profit or a business or for-profit business.
That's great, Mark. Thank you.